Welcome to the first DAX, the Data Science AI Exchange. And I'm really excited to spend the day with all of you and with some really interesting speakers and the topics that we'll be discussing. This is an exciting time at the Data Science Institute in launching DAX. And this is our very first event of the series. And today, we are going to be talking around the topic of responsible AI. I would like to introduce to you Garud Iyengar, who is the Avanessians Director of the Data Science Institute and the Professor of Industrial Engineering and Operations Research here at Columbia. Garud.
Thank you, Lori. Welcome, everyone. Before I go through my opening remarks, just a logistical exercise. Please download this Hua app. That is the one that you'll be using to network, to submit questions to the panel, and we're going to be working through that. So please do that. As Lori mentioned, I'm the director of the Avanessians Director of the Data Science Institute. I'm also a professor here in the Industrial Engineering and Operations Research Department at Columbia Engineering. I am really excited about DAX. It's so wonderful to see a mix of colleagues, academic colleagues, people from industry, from government, all attending today's event. Our goal really is to find how data science and AI could be impactful in societies. We want to be technically rigorous, but also socially responsible. It's AI and the associated technologies around AI are rapidly transforming. And therefore, in order to make sense of this new technology that is completely impacting society in deep ways, we have to bring all different sectors of society together: academics, nonprofits, governments, industry, and this is the spirit behind DAX. We want this to be a place where it is a data and AI exchange. We exchange ideas with each other to figure out what is the right way of advancing this society for the best impact for us all. This event is going to be focusing on different ideas every year. This year, we are focusing on responsible AI. As AI technology becomes ready for deployment, and a lot of it is already getting deployed, the stakes are ever higher than before. These systems are defining decisions, operating at scale, and responsible AI is what is necessary for this operation at scale to happen. It builds trust, it builds confidence in the ecosystem, and creates conditions for sustainable innovation, the technology gets impacted in a big way, there's risk management, and there is long-term value. That's been the focus of this program. To give you a little bit of an overview of how we are going about it, let's look at the program. We're going to have 3 different panels. The session 1 is going to be on privacy and security, where we'll consider what it takes to protect sensitive data while building systems and earn and maintain trust. The issue of trust will come back again. In session 2, we'll be focusing on safety and agentic AI. We'll explore how organizations are defining control, accountability, and guardrails for autonomous agentic systems, and broadly, how they should be going about creating these guardrails. Session 3 is going to be on governance, explainability, and compliance. And all of these sessions are going to be moderated by Cara Miller, who's the host of It Turns Out podcast. I just downloaded the first episode. It's fantastic. And she's also the columnist at the Boston Globe. The keynote speaker today is Bob Hedges. He was the Global Chief Data Officer at Visa, and he's now a research fellow at MIT's Initiative on Digital Economy. His topic is how consumers will drive success of AI and how we can help them. And the topic really focuses on how can we build trust around AI systems. And finally, at the end of the program, I'll be leading a fireside chat with Francesca Rossi. She's the AI ethics global leader at IBM, who was just recognized at AI Magazine's top 100 women in AI, and it's about how does responsible AI get implemented in various organizations. After that, we'll have to have an innovation expo that's being set up behind you already. It will feature 24 research and entrepreneurial projects from across Columbia. You'll see startups emerging from our labs alongside new research focused on real-world applications and potential commercialization. This is a chance to move beyond discussion and go into seeing what our faculty, students, and other researchers are building using AI. We encourage you to network and connect with all of these. They are looking forward to talking with all of you who are attending this event. This is the first event of a new program on strategic alliances that we are building at the Data Science Institute. I want to recognize Lori Glover, DSI's chief for strategic alliances, who's leading our partnership efforts and who curated this program. We are convinced at the DSI and at Columbia that we need the depth of academic research, the scale of industry, and the perspective of government shaping policy and standards to have impact across the field of data science and AI. When all of these come together, you start to see lasting and impactful partnerships. If you have interest in working with us on any of the topics that we discussed today or other things related to AI, please reach out to her. Her contact information is on the QR code, and of course, if you just Google search it, you will get it. AI's impact today is being defined by choices we make now and the partnership built today. DAX is an attempt to advancing this at the Data Science Institute and at Columbia University. It is now my pleasure to introduce Columbia's Provost, Angela Olinto, who will share more about Columbia's broader efforts of AI across the university. Angela.
Thank you, Garud. This is so exciting. Welcome, everybody, to DAX. This is, as I'm sure you already heard all the exciting program that we'll be sharing with you today. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today with you. I'm Angela Olinto. I'm the provost, as Garud introduced me. I'm an astrophysicist, and in my own life as an astrophysicist, AI comes inside detectors that look for the highest energy particles moving at the speed of light in the atmosphere. So very different than the industry, but it's where at least machine learning type and neural nets have been used. So I wanted to welcome everybody to DAX, Columbia's flagship forum, bringing together leaders from academia, industry, and government to engage in thoughtful dialogue on the future of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is no longer confined to a single domain. It is shaping every sector of the economy, from science, as I mentioned, healthcare and finance, to media, infrastructure, and public policy. The defining challenge is not whether AI will transform these fields, but how responsibly and equitably that transformation unfolds. Responsible AI is not just an ethical aspiration, it is a necessity for all of us. For industry in particular, it builds trust with consumers and stakeholders. It enables risk management and regulatory readiness. It underpins long-term value creation and sustainable innovation. Organizations that lead in responsible AI are the ones most likely to earn and sustain public confidence. Research universities like ours play a unique and essential role in this moment. Faculty, researchers, and students advance foundational research in fairness, transparency, and safety. We educate the next generation of leaders who will design and govern AI, and we drive conversations across sectors and disciplines like the one we're having today. At Columbia, we see it as our responsibility to ensure that innovation and ethics advance together. From its inception, the Data Science Institute has been guided by a commitment to responsible data and AI, serving as a hub for research, education, and partnership across sectors. Your phone calls you in the middle of a speech. That's a first for me. your phone through your bracelet here. So from its inception, the Data Science Institute, led by Garud, who is doing an amazing job at leading this huge, complex institution on the data science and AI. From its inception, the Data Science Institute has been guided by a commitment to responsible data and AI, serving as a hub for research, education, and partnership across all sectors inside and outside the university. The complexity of AI's impact demand collaboration between academia, industry, and government, and forums like DAX are important because they move us beyond theory towards shared practice and implementation. The question before us is not simply what AI can do, but what it should do, and how we ensure its benefits are broadly shared. Today is about exchanging ideas and building the partnerships needed to translate responsible AI into real-world impact. It is my great pleasure to introduce you our keynote speaker, Bob Hedges, brings a rare combination of industry, leadership, and academic perspective. He previously served as Chief Data Officer at Visa, where he led data strategy at global scale and helped shape how one of the world's largest financial networks uses data and AI responsibly. He now continues his work as a research fellow at MIT's Initiative for the Digital Economy, contributing to thought leadership and at the intersection of data technology and business transformation. Bob's career reflects exactly the kind of perspective this moment demands: deep experience and understanding of implementing AI in complex regulated environments, a strong understanding of the data governance and trust, and a forward-looking view of how AI will reshape industries globally. His insights will help us think not only about what is possible, but about what it takes to deploy AI responsibly at scale. So let's give him a big hand of applause. Thank you, Bob, for being here. Come on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to thank Columbia for inviting me to come talk about a topic I feel very passionately about, which is making sure we get responsible data use and responsible AI right. And the clumsy title to my talk, How Consumers Will Drive the Success of AI and How We Can Help Them, is intentionally clumsy. Because what I'm trying to do is spotlight the issue that at the end of the day, whether or not as a society we have success with AI or not, is going to be on whether or not consumers engage and trust it. And whether or not consumers engage and trust it is our individual responsibility. As a data scientist, as someone who's a professional in the data and AI space, it isn't some corporate policy that's going to make this happen. It isn't going to be some regulatory act that's going to make this happen. It's because you personally decide that in the way you conduct your professional activities, the way you engage with your colleagues, the way you pursue innovation is going to be centered around the interest of consumers. And it's a non-trivial challenge, having spent my career in financial services, to always work to keep consumers in the center. But that's going to be my ask of you today. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes trying to make that case. But before I get started, besides being excited that I'm here at Columbia, I'm really excited to be in the Roone Arledge Auditorium. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who knows who Roone Arledge is, but when I walked in here this morning and saw that, I took a photograph of it and sent it to all my children and all my siblings, because they all know who Roone Arledge is. Now, growing up in the 1960s in central Connecticut outside of Hartford, every Saturday afternoon watching one of the 3 channels you could get on our black and white TV, our favorite show as a kid was ABC Wild World of Sports. And Roone Arledge invented that show and was the executive producer of it for years. And he did 2 things that will live with us forever. One is he came up with the idea of profiling athletes in what he called the up close and personal. And you'd get to know the athlete before they competed. You'd meet their mother and father. You'd go to the school they grew up in. That's the reason why so many of us cried when Lindsey Vonn crashed in Cortina back a couple months ago is because they had done such a good job making her up close and personal, the technique that he created and made sort of a hallmark of sports television. The other thing he did, if you ever saw the TV show at the very end of the sizzle reel at the beginning, he has the most famous tagline of all time. And that is, in sports, it all comes down to the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. And my brothers and I would rehearse or play out the agony of defeat all winter long on the sledding hill behind our house, because you'd come down the hill, and when you got down to the bottom, you'd roll off the sled and collapse and scream out the agony of defeat. So I know I burned some time talking about Roone Arledge, but it's important that we all recognize what a profound influence he has been on American culture. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to start by talking about what I'm calling the fumbled decade. That's the last 10 years. I call it a fumbled decade because if you go back to 2015, what was happening with the digital revolution was scintillating and exciting and fun. Whoever saw the movie The Internship, right? What an awesome movie. And I still laugh about some of the scenes in it because that's what AI was about at that point in time. It was about the possibilities and how profoundly our lives could be changed. The movie was in 2013. This is 2018. The Senate Finance Committee hearings regarding Cambridge Analytica. And so the harsh reality that set in on us, that this thing isn't always, sugar and nice, that there's some things going on regarding how data is being collected and used in our society, and the implications for how AI could manage us that needs to be really understood. And based on those hearings, you could look at the time, the value of Facebook stock at the time, a gigantic deterioration in value, and maybe more importantly, going from almost 80% trust percentage among US consumers down to 27, and a percentage that never really recovered from that very, very specific incident. And so while there's all sorts of possibilities and excitement, there's this burden that is out there all the time, and we ignore it at our peril. Is that, do consumers actually trust you? And there's been a fair amount of academic research that shows there's actually, if you need to make the shareholder value argument for this, there's a fair amount of research that suggests there's about a 30% difference between companies that are trusted and ones that aren't trusted in the same category. So there's a premium around being trusted that the Cambridge Analytica event spotlighted the danger of crossing. Now, over the last 10, 20 years, there's been a profound reshaping of the US economy. So this chart, which I borrow from Professor Andrew McAfee at MIT, shows the top 20 US public companies sized by market cap in 2005. Now, to make this easy for us all, it was about $3 trillion of market cap at that point in time. GE was the most valued company in 2005, was just under $400 billion in assets. Now we fast forward to 2025, and this is relative scale. So in 2005, the total market cap was about 3 trillion. Today, depending on how you measure it, it's around 30 trillion, so a 10x increase. And you can see how dominated it is by today by the data, semiconductor, and AI companies. So there's no question that there's a fascination as well as tremendous value being created by those companies, and the traditional corporates have dramatically sort of sunset in their relative size. So we wake up today in an economy that is much more involved in and dependent on data, technology, and AI than it was 20 years previously. But this issue of being trusted hasn't gone away, and the need to sort of deal with it and sort of avoid adopting the hubris of being so valuable and important, and instead understand the true fragility of the trust that consumers have. Now, we've seen this play out even in the last year with the rising to real preeminence and high profile the leaders of the large technology companies. This photograph taken from President Trump's inauguration in 2025, standing actually in front of the cabinet secretaries. So there's no question the critical role that data and AI has in the US economy. And I sort of love this photograph where that same group was invited subsequently to the White House to meet with President Trump in the Oval Office. So we have value. The high value is shown in the marketplace, in the stock market, and we have clout and influence evidenced by their presence at these events. But having fumbled the trust, we also have this interesting phenomenon breaking out today in which the data and AI innovators have assembled, or in the process of assembling, the largest political lobbying PAC set of dollars ever assembled before. Now look across the set of AI data sort of innovation groups that are working really hard to make sure that there's not excessive regulation. The total amount, if you also add in the individual company PACs, now exceeds $400 million. So a gigantic war chest getting ready to deal with how the public perceives and experiences whether or not AI and data innovation should be trusted. And just to put it in comparison, that $400 million compares to the tobacco industry at 40. So this is a dramatic equipping, outfitting oneself to be ready for public debate and be ready to participate in a political process around the activities that data and AI may or may not be sort of totally aligned with the interest of consumers. Which, this chart sort of breaks my heart. I don't know if anyone's seen this before. It was a recent poll taken at the beginning of March by NBC News. They asked consumers to rate the institutions they had confidence in the United States. I cut off the top 20. The bottom 2. The second from the bottom is ICE, which got a -18 score. It's a net promoter score, your positives versus your negatives, a -18. The only thing lower than ICE was AI, with a score of -20. Now, you can't make this up. This is NBC News consumer research from the beginning of March, showing that American consumers have lower regard for AI players than they do for ICE. So it makes you think. So let's talk about, with that as a backdrop, let's talk about the history of data innovation. There's a really well-chronicled, impressive story going back to the late 1800s in terms of how technological advances enabled new functionality that allowed new benefits to be provided. So we're on a 100-year plus journey. This all isn't like the last 5 years. This isn't all since November 22. This is a long 100-year journey we've been on. And it's created all sorts of marvelous companies and new brands and new capabilities that haven't been previously thought of. And as a result of that, there's some extraordinary things that have happened. We have almost 5 billion people connected over the internet. Depending on the measurements you take, there's about a 10x increase in productivity due to the advances, and at least $15 trillion of value ascribed to what these capabilities are. Right? At the same time, consumers are concerned and unsatisfied. Say that quietly out loud, right? Consumers are concerned and not satisfied. 80% of Americans say they're concerned about what happens with their data when it goes to a corporate. 82% of Americans are specifically concerned about what happens when their data gets used by an AI application. Now, I know there's all sorts of people who argue. They talk about this thing called the privacy paradox as a way to suggest that being concerned about this isn't something you should have to worry about because this is just consumers, this is the paradox. They don't actually believe this. I rather we take what consumers are saying they believe seriously, right? They're concerned and not satisfied. And there's lots of things they can point to. There's a history of what I'm calling corporate overreach, right, with using data. There's the famous story, right, about Target and the father of the woman who was pregnant finding out from the cashier at Target because they had a code on their account. But there's lots of stories like that. It doesn't take that much time to generate a really, really good list. And there's billions of dollars of fines that have been paid by companies that have used data in ways that they didn't have permission to do. I'm not talking about data breaches. I'm talking about there's explicit contractual terms and conditions associated with the use of the data. They either intentionally or accidentally blew through them and violating the law. And I think the issues become that what was intended maybe to shame people has gotten viewed a bit as like it's just a cost of doing business. We'll pay the fines and move on, because the opportunity to create more value through that use of data is so large. Now, again, we can forgive an error. What's really fun, if you want to spend a couple hours on a weekend, is if you look at the patents that have been filed by companies that are looking at how can they use data to model and infer consumer behavior in categories that like, really? Someone spent their time to figure out how you can listen to the sounds of a consumer in the bathroom through their phone, use that to do an appraisal of their health conditions, and use that to drive advertising, right? There's a company that has that patent because they wanted to know how they could monetize their access to that data, right? And it's both sort of surreptitiously collecting the data. I mean, in not every case is it technically illegal. It's just like, really? Would you do that to a friend? And then working to build and patent the capabilities to sort of monetize that knowledge. That I'm pretty certain in all cases consumers would suggest that it's not something they knew someone was actually trying to study on their behavior, right? And the new frontier of this is this whole topic of dynamic pricing, right? It's one thing to send you marketing messages about how you probably need, shoe inserts because you have a weak arch and they hear you moaning at night in the bathroom. That's sort of one thing. It's another thing to use knowledge of you're operating with a sense of urgency, that you're running through the store quickly, you've complained about a member of your family being sick, and you need to get medicine, and have that translate into a different price. And there's a whole set, again, patents that are being filed and capabilities being piloted and tested that lever that data in that way. And there's the really high-profile story back in December here. New York Times ran an excellent story about Instacart's dynamic pricing practices in the egg category, right? And the thing we have to remember is some data scientists built that. Someone said, that's a really good idea that I want to be associated with. Like, really? Think about how you would answer the question if you were asked to do that, knowing that the objective was to charge as much as possible to a consumer for eggs. I don't think we should say that's innovation. I think there's a lot of other things that we can say that it is. So what if consumers mattered? Like, what if all the energy going into some of these techniques and capturing data were applied and poured into innovations that clearly benefited the consumer, as opposed to the investors or shareholders that were backing the work, right? Because consumers are pretty clear about what they want. They want to be educated about how the data is being used. They want to make sure the policies are written in a way that it's about helping them, not protecting the company, right? They want to know, rather than believing that 64% of US companies get more, 64% of consumers think companies get more benefit, that consumers think that 90% of consumers think they're the ones benefiting from all this. Like, do the thought experiment about what we would need to do to get there, right? And consumers, there's a whole body of research that consumers are pretty clear about what it is that will earn their confidence and their trust. Has to do with the transparency of the use case. Has to do with the amount of control that they have over the data. Has to do with the ability to take back permission to use data when it's used in a way that they don't think is appropriate, right? So it's not like it's hard to find out what it is that consumers consider most important. Actually, when I was at Visa, we did a whole series of focus groups around the world. And I actually ran a set of them in the English-speaking countries where I could run the focus group. And if you ask consumers, they will tell you there's no privacy paradox. They will tell you, what they do believe is no one's helping them. And that as an individual that they feel powerless. But that's not a paradox. That's sort of the way that the system has evolved. And so if you look over time, there's been this continuous pattern of innovations around data, that's the top line, corporate overreaches that occurred in response to that, right? And then the bottom row, the set of things that have been consumer solutions that after the fact, people came forward, developed some solutions. Often it's like, 4 people in a garage trying to come up with an app that'll be the antidote to the problem. It eventually happens, but it didn't happen at the beginning. And it didn't happen until after there was clear harm done. So you think about other professions. The medical profession is the best. Like, why is there no Hippocratic oath for data scientists? Do no harm. Now, companies have their policies and, you can find them on their website. But I'm talking about as professionals in the space, that we share a set of strong common values, the way data should be used and innovation should occur. Steve Jobs had it right. 2010, hiding in clear sight. I believe people are smart. Some people want to share more data than other people do. Ask them. Ask them every time. Make them tell you to stop asking them. Let them know precisely what you're going to do with their data. We even have a bit of an answer that we could copy. The problem is the leaders in data innovation have let us down. They've let us down in a number of areas. They've let us down on this whole issue of consumers have to let their data be captured to train their models. They've let us down because they have declined to invest in AI safety planning like they should. And they've let us down as consumers because all sorts of benefits they'll give corporate users of their AI applications they don't give to consumers. Right? Particularly this whole issue around control over data. So the whole issue of opt-in, I know this is an arcane thing, and I know the lawyers really like it, and they all get revved up, and that usually kills the conversation. But the general practice today is it takes extra effort to not have your data get captured for training purposes, right? A conscious decision that it's an opt-out. And I always wonder, well, if the right thing to do from a consumer perspective is make them opt in, why hasn't that happened? Unless, of course, key to the value of these companies is all this consumer data that they're forcing be collected, in which case you end up in a different issue regarding whether or not it's a fair deal. But the issue around opting in versus opting out ought to be a relatively easy, straight fix. The fact you can't, once your data has been collected, it's there forever. There's no way to recover it, delete it, take it out of the memory of the companies. Another loss for consumers that in a corporate environment would never happen. The issue regarding catastrophic AI planning. This work all done by the Stanford HAA group, but it spotlights, again, this ought to be something, given the value and the revenues, we ought to be able to stand up the right kind of team to do the work. And then finally, this issue of that sort of basically two standards for privacy. The standard of privacy that corporates get, versus the standard of privacy that consumers get. So if you look across the Stanford scorecard, there's a lot of significant gaps. Again, we sort of have a blueprint regarding what it is we need to do to get the confidence of consumers. It's not like we have to go out and study the issue and survey all sorts of consumers and go on sort of a long wilderness hike. We have some pretty clear blueprints we can follow. And the problem is when industries know they have issues and they look the other way, nothing good ever happens, right? So we've seen this before, right? The social media issues regarding Meta and the court decisions that have recently come out regarding their accountability for what happened, right? That's just an anecdote. But when you look over time, there's a whole series of excellent examples where other industries have had the same kind of challenges. The auto crash safety, the role of leaded gasoline, the role of tobacco, the Ford Pinto example where rear-end collisions and the car would explode, and the famous Ford memo that suggested it might be a problem, but we don't want anyone to know about it, right? So we have lots of precedent to inform the kind of judgments we should be exercising today from past industry experiences, again, which can be easily researched. This isn't like you have to go in the lab. But the pattern is this is what happens. First, we know we got a problem, but of course we deny it, and then we delay it, and then maybe we settle it, and then finally, 5 years later, 10 years later, there's regulation that tries to address it, an issue that we knew 5, 10, 15 years previously was an issue, but there was a reluctance on the part of the industry professionals to take it on. I certainly understand how you can have a conflict of interest in your head and in your heart if you're working on one of these applications. This may be a problem. We got to all step up and support the people. We say, there's a problem here. We got to do something about it. And it's happening again right now on a whole set of different data and AI innovation fronts. So you don't have to look too hard, and you can find the example of here's the issue, here's the concern, there's a case, Kashmir Hill writes an article in the New York Times, there's a story, companies scramble, we start down the same pattern again. So I ask, what would consumer-focused data innovation look like? Like, what are the things that if we were really serious about gaining the trust of consumers and earning it so we could fully capitalize on the potential for AI to be transformative in our society, what are the things that we would do? I think there's 5 things we would do. We'd make sure consumers always can understand how their data is being used. We'd protect them against entrapment and dark patterns. We'd make sure they could go shopping using AI without being manipulated by messages that were curated for them based on the rest of their history. We'd insulate them from consumer harm associated with dynamic pricing. And we'd give them the ability to use AI without giving up their identity, without giving up their personal data, and maintaining sovereignty over their own memory. These are all things as individual consumers we probably want, right? But they're not things that the current trajectory of innovation is taking care of. So consumers care how their data is used. FTC order, this goes back a number of years now. There's the FTC study from 2 years ago on this topic, saying that we're settling and there ought to be a law. But there ought to be a company. There is a company. There's a company called Terms of Service Didn't Read. And they have digitized all the privacy and data use policies of all the large corporates. They've built a bot that you can scan. They're working on a consumer app that you could go find out, I'm going to do business with this company. Should I like their policies or not? So there is work going on, not in high-profile ways. Lots of research on dark patterns, right? It goes back several years now. Excellent research paper by Marie Potoseville and Matilda De Roca. documenting how consumers get trapped and what are the things that they do. So they have a company. It's called Fair Patterns. And what it is going to enable is putting on your browser the ability to screen any website that you're at. And it'll identify any of the practices in the design of that UX that are a dark pattern and alert you. Beware. You're going to get in trouble if you click that button. How cool is that? Like, given the fact that we have an issue that the developers haven't refrained from using dark patterns, we can innovate to protect against them. Similarly, there's a lot of research being done, some recent papers that are about to come out that show decisively that consumers can't tell when they're getting AI messaging embedded in content that's actually in advertising. They can't tell because the messaging is so well crafted. So Alessandro Gisti at MIT is building a whole experimental framework, doing testing to sort of confirm this in a big public way that consumers can't tell, and more importantly, to be able to document how much purchase behavior or paying more for something occurs than would have if the advertisement hadn't been there. Trying to get some bona fide academic research that solves the problem. We talked about dynamic pricing and the issues that are there, right? The Instacart story. Another innovation. The ability that when you go online, if it's possible to track all your behaviors and how much you spend on a given part of a website and use that to inform pricing decisions because you've looked at that airline ticket 5 times, so you probably really want to go. So each time it goes up, who's ever had that happen, right? This would be the people's agent, is whenever you put anything in your shopping cart, it would go out to the network and say, what if other people paid for that exact same thing? So you'd know. You get the alert, you're paying a lot more than you should. Remember Red Laser? Probably no one here is old enough to remember. Where you'd go into the store and you'd take a picture of the barcode and it would tell you the price of that item and all the other local retailers, so you wouldn't overpay, and then you were supposed to negotiate with the store manager. It was quite successful. So it got bought by a digital platform. But, and then this is sort of the same thing. And then finally, this issue of AI. Tim Berners-Lee back in 2017 wrote a memo about this thing he calls Charlie, and ironically in his memo, he wrote about someone named Bob, but I didn't know Tim at that point in time, where we've got to figure out how to recapture control. And it goes after sort of the 5 things that consumers really care about regarding interactions with LLMs. They don't want to get tracked. They want the consumer to be able to define the context. They want to control what happens to their data. They don't want to have to sacrifice their anonymity, their IP address or the device that they're on. And they want to be able to control the interaction. And so that translates into 5 very clear sets of functionality that need to be created and deployed to give consumers what they want. Data control and consent, deletion of all PII. And so you can imagine a consumer who is shielded, sort of operating in incognito mode. They load up the data that they need to have to send to the LLM to get the answer that they want. The data is de-identified or differential privacy is applied to improve it. And then it's finally sent out to the LLM, privately de-identified and with no ability to maintain the history. We can do that. There's an innovation that would profoundly impact consumers' preparedness to work with LLMs, and that they're all capabilities that can actually be, in some cases, actually be open sourced and assembled together. So as you wrap up, I thought, has anyone ever listened to this whole speech? I know Artemis just came back from the moon, but the Kennedy speech at Rice University. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We should choose to innovate on behalf of consumers, not because it is easy, but because it's the right thing to do. And the irony is, it probably wouldn't be that hard to put together the sets of things that would make a profound difference to how consumers perceive and trust AI. And it's absolutely in the power of everyone in this room to make a difference on that front. Consumer-focused innovation, we have examples of that. My favorite example, the three-point seatbelt invented by Niels Bohlin of Volvo in 1959. He declined to file the patent because he wanted everyone to have three-point seatbelts because it would have such a profound impact on auto fatalities. Right? Or in the case of the polio vaccine, Jonas Salk famously saying, "No one can have a patent on the sun." So when we do something that's fundamentally in the interest of consumers, it ought to be broadly made available. So what we must do, and I believe this is what we should do. First, we need to have a really clear set of principles regarding consent must be real. Data portability must be enabled. Transparency must be honest. And the value must flow both ways. If there's trillions of dollars of value being created because fill-in-the-blank sets of data are being made available, then it ought to be shared in a way. Or if that's not the case, then we shouldn't have to worry about capturing the data. I mean, one of those two things is true. So my ask of each of you here today, because this is where when you go back to your job, when you get out of school and you're working for a company, you're talking to a VC, this is where you can make a difference. Make sure we fund and build the innovations that consumers actually need. That will have a big impact. Demand that we have a meaningful kind of Hippocratic oath for data and AI, and a data science culture that puts humans first in the interest of consumers will be what we're centered on. Speak out against efforts to erode data privacy rights or dismiss the concerns. It's just the privacy paradox. Don't you understand? Consumers always say they don't really mean it. Lead within your community to ensure data and AI innovation delivers for humans. Embrace a consumer-focused view of data and AI and invest your time accordingly. And maybe most importantly, choose. This is a choice. Choose to be on the right side of history on this topic. The next decade is going to belong to the data and AI innovation leaders who choose to build it right. And we should all work together with consumers to do so. Thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you. That was great, incredibly thought-provoking. I feel like everybody here probably shares that. I mean, not just as people who are interested in technology, but just as, humans in the world. So let me pick up. I want to ask you a couple lightning round questions before we move on to the first panel. Let me pick up on that thing that you just said at the end, which is this idea of value flowing both ways. I feel like you are trying to intimate that, yeah, there is money to be made by caring about consumers. But I think if we could have big tech here and give them truth serum, right, they would say, hey, the way a lot of our value comes from hoovering up this data. Like, that is the gold. So how do you square those two things?
Well, I think if it's using the metaphor you used, if it's hoovering up, it's sort of skipping over the issue which other countries in legislation have established, that it's the consumer's data. So the just hoovering of it up, if it was someone else's property, in a number of countries around the world would be a violation of the law. Now, we don't have that legal framework in the United States. That's a whole other conversation. But I think squaring the two things is that it's pretty consistently clear that if consumers are given value and transparency, they'll share more data. Most of the research that we did when I was at Visa showed that about a third of US consumers declined to participate in the digital economy over trust concerns. So there's a third of US households that haven't bought things online, don't regularly do search. And so we're leaving a large portion of society behind over the fact we haven't won their trust yet. So I think we can broaden the value for everybody if we deal with the issues that are holding people back. And so it's not a debate of who, in my mind, I don't think we want to frame it as who gets what share of the pie, or the pie should be much larger by enabling and supporting consumers' participation.
Do you worry that the reliance on data and the need to capture that data overtly or surreptitiously is even more intense as the pressure to integrate AI ramps up? Because being able to crawl websites, I mean, this is like where the information comes from. This is how the AI is trained.
I mean, I think, yes, which again means we better figure out a way to gain the confidence of people. I mean, if, there's a scenario, in the category of dynamic pricing.
Yes.
That depending on, retail spend in the United States is about $20,000 per household per year. Those are items you buy in a grocery store or an electronics store or buy online. If we have a 10 or 15% appreciation in prices because of models that suggest that person will be willing to pay more than they need to for an item because they have a crisis at home, they're in a hurry to get to work, they never pay attention to the prices to begin with, that's $3,000 a household. That is, they didn't have to spend. So there's a real consumer harm here if we don't put the right guardrails around the practice. And so I know there's the risk of innovation. I mean, you hear the arguments, that the US is more innovative than Europe because we don't have the controls that Europe has. The flip side of that is US consumers may be paying a higher amount for the same for items than they should because we don't have the controls around the item. Right? And I think if we want to have, and we need to have, the technology community and specifically AI held in the highest esteem by American society because of all that it could do, and instead, it's tripping up on nickel and diming systematically consumers. Like that, it makes no sense given the problems we could be solving to not sort of take the right steps to actually gain the full confidence of consumers.
Just a real quick final question for you. Do you see any signs that the world that you would like to see, the companies that you would like to see are coming into existence? Like, is there the tip of the iceberg? Because right now it feels like imagine how hard it is to extricate yourself from the networks of Google or to buy nothing ever on Amazon. These are very thick and kind of all-encompassing networks.
Well, there's that, and there's also the reality that if you want to raise money to build a business and you go to the venture capital community, the large corporate venture groups, and you say, well, I'm not really, I have this great idea. It's going to save American consumers hundreds of dollars each year, but I don't know how we're going to make any money doing it. It would be hard to get a check written to fund it, right? But I think what's happening is two things. One is I think there's a dawning realization that the cavalry isn't about to come over the hill with a whole set of regulatory actions that make the world a better, safer place for consumers. It isn't going to happen. At the same time, the costs of technology leadership not dealing with this issue well is going to cost us technology leadership as a nation. And so there's an alignment of interests, I think, starting to happen where people are realizing we've got to figure out a way to make some meaningful progress on this front, or we put at risk the bigger play for the US being the true leader in this space. It's easy to be the leader in this space if you're worried about it in 12, 24-month sprints. But if a decade from now we want to say that the United States has been decisively the leader in AI and the application of data and technology to improve society, we can't skip over this step. And I think people are beginning to realize that.
Bob, thank you so much. What a great way to kick off the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.